and a lovely little band. Anyway, Tony LFC. Hello, Frankie. Hope all's well, mate. And there's these bands are sent over the beers to Derek and Anthony in the moment. And there is Derek. There he is. First start. Hiya, Derek.
Hi. Good to see you again, Frank. Seems like forever since we last spoke.
I think you're right there, yeah. And there's our other friends here. Anthony, there he is. There's the man himself.
Good evening, Derek. Good evening, Frank.
This is good, you know, because Derek was on with me on Saturday morning to film and TV show. It was great. It was great. It really was. He loves films besides his music and besides his big thick book, his encyclopedia of Liverpool rock and roll. Unraveled. So everything is unraveled in the book. It really is great. It really is, honestly. And yeah, look, Tony, evening, Anthony, hope all as well.
Evening, Tony. Thank you.
That's double Scotch for you. Lynn Ellis, evening, Derek, and evening, Anthony.
Good evening.
Lovely. And Saturday morning, methinks Derek. Honestly, that's it, because he made a big impact. And he will come on again when he's got time. Because I've asked him to watch a few films, haven't I? Derek?
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to watching them.
I'm glad you are. Because I just want, you know, like a review of them. That's all, you know. And I've given you 3 films, and one of them is Knowing. I really like your opinion on that.
Yeah.
I really do. I told Jason to watch a film called 65. It's just called 65, and it's the latest one. And anyway, he watched it, and because I said to him, I said, do us a favour, let me know what you think, because I strongly recommended it, and he said it was fantastic. You know, so if he says anything's fantastic, it says be good. So
I did read up on it, but I've not watched it yet. Yeah, I've seen it.
Watch it, please, Anthony. When you get a couple of hours, you know, when there's no one. What I'm saying is, when there's you get coffee, Derek, not Tony. You don't get scotches or beers. The coffee you get. Anyway, yeah, watch it, please, Anthony, because I really love your opinion on 65. It's good, believe me. So anyway, I just want to tell the people out there, the second half of the show, I'm going to talk about, after the clip, I'm going to talk about the English Civil War and the impact it had on Liverpool and what it was all about. Yet we never get mentioned in the history books. Never. And I'll surprise you about what the impact was like here. And it's just like, you know, the May Blitz during the Second World War. We hardly get mentioned at all in the history books. And I don't know what it is about the history of Liverpool and outsiders, historians who don't write about us. I think it's shocking. I really do. I really think it's shocking. There's Liverpool, Derek and Anthony. We've got more connections with America than any other European city. I mean, this was the gateway. Liverpool was the gateway to the New World, which was America, obviously. and Canada. You can't leave Canada out of it. But this was the gateway. Hardly ever gets mentioned. Some of the people who went through, Liverpool to get to America is phenomenal. It's phenomenal. And yet, we never get mentioned. Never get mentioned. Ernest Borgnine, Ernesto Borgnini, I'll give this as an example. He went to St. Francis Xavier's School as a little Sicilian kid, couldn't speak a word of English, and this is where he learnt his language. I'm just giving you this as an example. And anyway, his brother wrote a biography, not autobiography, a biography of Ernest Borgnine. And he doesn't mention, he said, I didn't even know that we went through Liverpool. See what I mean?
Yeah.
Like his family. When little Ernest was a boy, he didn't even know. So what you read up on things, even biographies, not autobiographies, but biographies that other people write about other people. There's lots of important things missing. The likes of Ernesto Borgnini as a little Sicilian. His family, there was a 6-month waiting list, and they put him into school. And that was St. Francis Xavier's up in Salisbury Street. And he went there, and he learned his English language there, and being educated at the same time. So you see, it's the same as Al Jolson. You know what I mean? He went to the same school, albeit being a little Jewish lad. They accepted him in because they just wanted to educate him. And that's where he learned his language, because he could only speak the Russian language. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's, the very first speaking part on the silver screen was when he said, "You ain't seen nothing yet." And those words that came out, those English words, was learned in Liverpool, in a Catholic school, St. Francis Xavier's. It's incredible, but nothing gets mentioned about that. Nothing at all. So anyway, that's it. So so the second half of the show, it's the English Civil War. And I'm going to ask Derek, because me and Anthony are going to be intrigued by this. So, Derek, what's the fusion with classical music? Well, you've got to say the opera and the pop culture.
Well, an awful lot of pop, rock, folk songs have their roots in classical music. You'd be amazed how many times, when I was sort of just researching and putting together some thoughts for tonight, people like Bach, Beethoven, and you'd be very pleased to know that Roy Wood is also a big fan of Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, Frank. Because his first ever hit, Night of Fear, is, to say it's based on it is a total understatement. It actually uses the 1812 theme, and that was his first hit single. It got into number 2, so that was a real good start for Roy Wood and the lads. And there are a couple of pieces of music tonight. Oh, excuse me. That really had a major impact on the world of rock and roll. I mean, one of them, it crops up everywhere, absolutely everywhere. And the other one has its roots very much in heavy metal. But I thought we might start tonight with one that is quite well known, Whiter Shade of Pale, Summer of Love.
Yeah. Do you know what? I could honestly, I'm amazed up with what you said about I love Roy Wood.
Yeah.
I love Roy Wood. I think he's brilliant. And, you surprised me by saying that, one of his favourite pieces of music is the 1812. Brilliant. And, give me the heavy metal stuff now.
Yeah. Well, the heavy metal one is actually Black Sabbath. It's got a really interesting background, and it gets a little bit technical in a sense, but we'll cope with that as we're getting into it. What happened was that Tony Iommi, the guitarist for the lads, he reimagined the opening bars of Mars from Gustaf Holst's Planet Suite, and he created something called the tritone sound, which is well, he didn't create it. He effectively harnessed it because it's been around for centuries, literally. And now it's a very sort of dark, lamenting sound, and it goes back to the medieval times. And I won't pretend that these are my words, but this is an explanation I came across for tritone, just to put it into context. A tritone is the interval between two notes, halfway between a perfect fourth, the opening notes, two notes of Here Comes the Bride, and the perfect fifth, the opening notes of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Because of its harsh and unwelcoming sound, it earned the nickname Diabolus in Musica, or the devil in music. I've also seen it called the devil's interval, and literally it was shunned by composers for decades from the medieval times. But Tony Iommi, inspired by Mars, Planet Suite Holst, he created what has become one of the cornerstones of heavy metal. So heavy metal owes a lot of its roots back to Holst, which is, I thought, really quite fascinating. I mean, that album, Black Sabbath's first album, it's on the legendary Vertigo Swirl label. If you're into vinyl, the Swirl label makes it very collectible. And Rolling Stone magazine put it as number 5 on their best 100 metal albums of all time. So it's quite a rated album. And that technically people argue that there were heavy metal songs before Black Sabbath, Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath. But really, that's when the genre really started to take off, I think, particularly in the UK.
Well, you mentioned Black Sabbath there. Paranoia, I think, is absolutely brilliant. The guitar and the music itself, and just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I love it. I really do. It's got good memories for me as well. Being a little bit younger, like that. But it's surprising, really. You know what I mean? And I knew all about the two notes and the metasyllable and everything else. I knew all about that. No, I didn't.
We've got another one of those coming up shortly with 8 specific chords. So, in these conversations, if things like F sharp minor are a meaningful concept to anyone, you'll really start to get the picture with some of these things. But just before we leave Holst, Manfred Mann's Earth Band also had a hit with Joybringer in 73, got them into the top 10. And that's another one from the Planet Suite. That was Jupiter. So, two of those tracks feature very heavily in the world of rock and roll. So you can see that there are very direct links. I mean, some of these songs that we talk about, like The Move, it really is the melody that they're using as the background. Sometimes it's more subtle, sometimes it's just inspirational. But there's so much going down. I mean, one of the famous ones, of course, is Procol Harum, Whiter Shade of Pale.
Whiter Shade of Pale, yeah.
Yeah.
I could never understand that. Honestly, I've heard it throughout the years, you know, it just comes on, doesn't it? Well, it always reminds me, funny enough, of a summer.
Yeah.
August. It always reminds me of that
Mm.
August, going back all those years in the 60s to a summer. The summer of love, you know. It wasn't a summer. But anyway, it reminds me of that, and I just couldn't understand the lyrics. I really couldn't. So carry on, please, Terry.
Yeah, I think a lot of the lyrics at that time, people like Bob Dylan and the Beatles, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and the like, you know, I think a lot of the lyrics then were stream of consciousness. I mean, that was very popular in a lot of the art forms in the 60s. That's another one based on Bach, Suite Number 3, Orchestral Suite Number 3, also known as Air on the G String. And some smokers may recognize it from the Hamlet cigar adverts on the TV.
Yeah.
That's the same piece of music. But what's fun about that particular song was, Bach doesn't actually get a credit on it, but neither did Matthew Fisher, who was the organist in the band at the time. When it was originally released, Gary Brooker and lyricist Keith Reid had the writing credits, released in '67. And then in the middle of '65, Matthew Fisher decided that he'd take it to court to claim royalties, because he reckons that, quite rightly, well, he won the case, so one could say quite rightly, he did contribute to it. But I think what happened was he won the case, but has royalties from the date of that case, which is often what happens in this kind of plagiarism claims. But again, I mean, it's one of those songs that really is part of the fabric. I mean, a BBC chart compiled for Radio 2 in 2009 had White Shade of Pale as the most played song in public places in the last 75 years.
Wow.
I
wonder, I keep on hearing it, because you switch up the radio or whatever, but you always seem to hear, even on YouTube, White Shade of Pale. Still couldn't understand it, but it's just got those memories for me personally. And when you mentioned Holst, I did mention Holst, didn't I, on the TV and film review what we did on Saturday, and it's on Knowing, it's the film Knowing, and it's at the end, Holst Planet. It's absolutely brilliant, and this is the beauty of classical music. You mentioned medieval stuff there. The first medieval stuff I've ever heard was Greensleeves by Henry VIII. Henry VIII.
That's right.
So that piece of music, Greensleeves, which is
crazy too, yeah.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
Well, can I go to a few
absolutely
comments? Gary Rigby, evening everyone. I've noticed, this is a cracking comment. I've noticed Liverpool doesn't get mentioned anywhere as it well gets dismissed. A lot of outsiders have a very low opinion of the city. Definitely something going on. Get in there. Great comment. Great comment, that Gary.
yeah.
I watch a lot of YouTube, and any video about Liverpool, you can bet the comments are full of insults and negativity. I'm being honest, I won't watch anything because of that. The comments and comments do come up, and it is, but it's all negativity. That's why I won't watch anything, to be honest. I'm not being super smart or anything, but anyway. James Max says, I said this before and say it again. In my opinion, it's because of jealousy. Yes. And the Irish connection. Yes. Because there is a huge presence of Irish in Liverpool. If you go back to the 80s, James, 85% of the population of Liverpool has Irish ancestry. As Irish blood in them, and Cedric Lopez, big up Franco, this isn't too intellectual for me. No, keep with us. It's going to be good. It's going to be really good. And Cedric says, big up Derek, Anthony will be listening while working. And greetings, Frank, Derek and Anthony. Don't care what others think. We love and fight for Liverpool spirit. I did a talk about the Liverpool spirit, the spirit of Liverpool, and some function that I had to go to, and it was really good. I was up with this. I was up with Professor Belching and Mike Costello. No, yeah, is it Mike Costello? Yeah, well, anyway, Costello. And I gave the spirit of Liverpool, and it was to all. Most of the audience were university undergraduates, and at the end, a couple of a few of them came up to the undergraduates and said, "We didn't realise the impact Liverpool had in history. Why isn't it mentioned?" And that's precisely what the lad said there just before. Roy Woods was in the Move, a fine rocking band, and I have an album by him. He plays all the instruments on it. Boulder's 73. Wow. Derek, have you heard Exploding Galaxy by Infantis Jubilat? 1968, a psychedelic masterpiece, also based on some classical music.
Yeah, no, I haven't come across that one. I mean, there's so much good music, particularly when you get into sort of prog psych era. A lot of it has its roots in classical music, and that was really when the second half of the 1960s, when the music was starting to take itself very seriously, and you have people like Rick Wakeman, who were classically trained, Keith Emerson. You start to get into some serious virtuoso musicians. I mean, Emerson, of course, both with Nice and with Emerson, Lake and Palmer. A lot of their stuff's based in classical music. Most famously, probably Pictures of an Exhibition, which they recorded live in March '71, based on Mussorgsky's Pictures of an Exhibition. I mean, they took the whole piece and turned it into an album. What was interesting, I mean, that was written by Mussorgsky as a piano suite, inspired by a friend of his who was an artist, Victor Hartmann, and it was actually orchestrated. So it wasn't how you think of it from Emerson, Lake and Palmer, because it was actually orchestrated by Ravel in 1922. It was written at the back end of the 1800s. Originally. And what's interesting is that with a few of these, you find that a particular classical composer is credited with it. And then you often find there's a link back to a previous one, or there's a link forward to something like that, where a piano suite's been orchestrated to broaden it out just a little. But I mean, Emerson, Lake and Palmer had a few Fanfare for the Common Man, Hoedown, both Aaron Copland compositions originally, Knife Edge, Janacek, and Ravel, of course, Bolero,
yeah.
Some of their stuff. So, I mean, they're a great example of a band that really did utilize classical music across, well, the whole spectrum of what they did, really.
Well, I'm just going to go through a few things, and I'm going to ask Anthony something, by the way. When Ace Kefford left the Move, his own band, the Ace Kefford Stand, were brilliant too. There you go. And Chris says, I was into the Beatles, Stones, Hendrix and Motown in the 60s, but Supertramp's lyrics impressed me into the 70s. Logical song, etc. James Mack, didn't they change the frequency of music from, and all this megahertz and things in 1953 worldwide? the standard, again, Martin, reference for tuning all music and instruments based on the chromatic scale. I haven't a clue. You might know I haven't a clue. The history of Liverpool. I always want this fella on the history show. And he's a great researcher, as David Owens. The history of Liverpool, not forgetting Pete Price. He will come out with something like that. Edward Elgar, Nimrod, is an amazing piece of music. It's timeless. And he carries on by saying, people are only jealous of us because of our ancestry. We are an eclectic mix of nations, and it shows in our taste in food and music. We are unique. Absolutely. I've noticed Manchester call themselves the capital of the North. I don't remember this ever being voted on. They just claim the title for themselves. I always say, Liverpool is 051 and Manchester is 061. And they do. It's the government that are forcing it on us. It's not Manchester itself, but it's the government. If Manchester wants anything, the government's there. If we want anything, we have to beg. And that's wrong. That's politically wrong and politically incorrect as well. I've always said that, always. And this is not football. Hi everyone, bless up. How are you all doing? AC Milan versus Liverpool tomorrow, 8 p.m. UCL is back for LFC fans. You never walk alone, and many times. Well, I'm doing a pod tomorrow, pre-match for all the Liverpool lads. And I'm doing a post-match too, so look out for that tomorrow, please, people. And Liverpool was always a bigger city, don't forget that, says Gary Rigby. I was on Sky Sports once, believe it or not, and they were talking to me, and they said, besides football, well, because we were playing Manchester United at the time, and they said, what else? I said, we fed Manchester. Manchester without Liverpool would never materialise, simply because of the cotton trade. The cotton trade. The cotton came through to Liverpool, and we gave Manchester. We gave until we had the Manchester Liverpool canal there, going from Liverpool to Manchester to bring the cotton through to them. So without Liverpool, they would have been nothing. That's what I said to them. And the reporter went, oh. I just saw he went, oh. It was funny, actually. When I went south, that is. And I'll get right back to, I want to ask Anthony a question. Then back to you, Terry. Not this, though. Listen to Islands by King Crimson. You can hear the classical influences right there. Same with Pink Floyd's live at Pompeii. Amazing stuff, says James.
Yeah.
Do you know, did you, Anthony, you're in a band, you're a music man, besides a big international artist. Did you have any idea about classical music coming into the pop culture?
Yeah, it kind of my lifetime. It's always been there. I think what Derek had hit home on before, I think music just grew that way. When you got great bands together, you had the little pop star bands and the rhyming Moon in June, Shining on the Spoon, and all of that kind of banal stuff. But when we came out to the 50s, and there were kind of progressive thinkers, and there were classical musicians in many, many bands, like the Doors, the Beatles were lucky enough to have George Martin, and and so it was always there and it always filtered through. And I think it became bigger for me when we got to the likes of David Bowie in stuff like Aladdin Sane and Life on Mars and stuff like that, where the I think Rick Wakeman played on that, where you were aware of the pops, it being a pop song because we're told and it's in the pop charts, but it sounded completely different from the bland kind of Moon in June kind of stuff that we had through the 50s. And there was some exceptional musicians, mainly keyboard players, I think, early on. But then as we got into the likes of the late 70s and the 80s, guitar players who were classically taught, heavy metal guys. I think heavy metal gave musicians the opportunity to sound orchestral, bigger, and the whole sound took us with them and became more like anthems than songs. Even bands like Queen, Freddie Mercury's semi-operatic voice,
Yeah.
their arrangements and stuff were. I remember the song, and it comes to there's a thousand we talk about, but one in the 70s, I think, by a guy called Eric Carr, and his song was All By Myself. And that had, I remember, a classical piece underneath it that it kind of hijacked or nicked a little bit of. And obviously, every other band has dipped into it, ELO, which we talked about before, Roy Wood. And I think, me personally, for the betterment of music in general, I think it tipped off a lot of people to classical music, and a lot of classical musicians to the possibilities of working with the pop field. I think the 60s into the 70s was a great time for music to kind of form. But then there's always been a downside, and the downside was obviously when we get towards the mid to late 1970s, when you had the backlash to that was the punk movement, which I kind of never, ever, ever got my head round. And they wanted to trash everything that sounded clever and put 2 or 3 chord songs in, which I hated. But it didn't last long. And good music is good music, and whether you're not you Mozart, it's hard to determine who in the modern age would rank with Mozart and Beethoven and stuff. People like McCartney, certainly for melodies and things, it's wide open.
Well, that's what I was going to ask Derek, funny enough, when you mentioned the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's, that changed the whole things, didn't it, of the culture, because they have violins and everything, and, that was unheard of.
Yeah.
That was unheard of. So, to me, that was classical as well. The classical music coming out with the Beatles, especially in Sgt. Pepper's.
We had it with jazz singers and stuff in the 40s and the 50s, but it became everything as a fashion, doesn't it? So bebop and swing and stuff took over, and it kind of always becomes a people's choice, which is a great thing about everything. And I think there's always been. I think what was a wonderful thing was a mix in the 80s, early 90s, when opera kind of became cool again, with the 3 tenors and Pavarotti and stuff, who you would never see on regular television or on the radio, but it just became great again, you know.
Well, I always remember Italia 90, and Nessun Dorma was the song to introduce Italia 90.
How beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely, Nessun Dorma. And anyway, just having a drink in the pub as you do, watching the games and that. And that came on, and there's old Pavarotti, belting it out.
Yeah.
And even the lads went, "Oh, it's a cracking song, that, isn't it? I'm getting used to that." I said, "Yeah." And they were like that. I wonder if he wrote it, or, I wonder who wrote it. I said, "I was written around 1890, something like that, by Puccini." And they went, "Who the F is he?" I said, "He's a composer." Piss off. They told me to piss off. That it's only been written. I said, "No." They thought I was joking. I said, "No, it was written then." Anyway, we just carried on drinking and watching the match. I was all forgotten.
I think that's part of the story. Is if we associate music with popular culture, a sport or whatever, it becomes bigger because there's more of an audience. People who wouldn't necessarily go to an opera were then, through sport. And I think it was the Euros, wasn't it, or something like that, that Nessun Dorma really took off, and it became massive, and you couldn't go anywhere without hearing it.
That's right.
Go ahead, Derek. Derek, yeah, there's one for you too. I should really go through it a lot, but anyway, I'll just see this one here. Concerto for Group and Orchestra, 1969 live album by Deep Purple, the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Malcolm Arnold. Do you know anything about that, Derek?
Yeah, it's a classic piece. It was around about the time of In Rock, and it's what it says on the tin. I mean, basically written by Deep Purple, and is then with full. I mean, the LSO, was it? Oh, Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. So I mean, it is a full-on orchestral piece. But I mean, Anthony just mentioned Eric Carmen. That's famously got its roots in Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, and I think one of the songs written in. Well, it's not a song, it's a canon in D, written in 1694. And when I start to run through just a half a dozen examples I've got here of where it's influenced. This is written by a German composer called Johan Pachelbel. He lived 1653 to 1706, and he wrote this piece called Canon in D in 1694, and it's got to be, if not the most influential piece of classical music on rock pop, then it's certainly up there with the influence. And you can hear its influence very much in as diverse as Ralph McTell's Streets of London, Village People Go West, and that's a great example of it and how to think about this particular piece of music. Kylie Minogue, I Should Be So Lucky. And what's interesting there, that stocks Aiken Waterman. And I've seen an interview in the Independent, I think it was, with Pete Waterman. And he says it was inspired by Pachelbel. But Stock and Aikman say, "Oh, no, it wasn't." But my money's on it was. And when we get sort of further down the story, you can check this out for yourself. It's fascinating. I mean, Aerosmith's crying. Green Day, Basket Case, 1995. I mean, 2006, the BBC Radio 1 listeners voted that the greatest punk song of all time. Got its roots in 1694. I quite like that. Oasis. You may have heard of Oasis.
No.
Don't Look Back in Anger. That's got its roots in this as well. A guy called Coolio to the edge of my sort of understanding of modern music. He's got a track called "See You When You Get There," and not only does it use this particular rhythm, as it were, it's more than the rhythm; it's the repetition as well and the chord structure. Very few modern day pop rock artists give any kind of accreditation to the classical root. But fair dues to Coolio, the first 10 seconds of that particular track, "See You When You Get There," starts with Pachelbel's Canon in D. And then you hear this great scratch, as though somebody scratched right across the record, and it goes into the song using the rhythm and the pace. And what it is, it's a certain set of... Now, I wouldn't pretend to understand much of what I'm saying here, because, I play the drums a bit, so we don't have a lot to do with chords. We're more sort of paddle-diddling and things like that. But apparently, what this is all about, it's a chord formation. And Pachelbel figured it should be played in D major. And the run of chords, and I say, if the actual chords make an individual impact, you'll get the point straight away. And the chord sequence in D major is D major, A major, B minor, F sharp minor, G major, D major, G major, and A major. And I think it's a sort of descending sequence, which is part of it. But I may be wrong there. I don't really understand the chords, I must say. But what it is as well, it's all about repetition. I mean, this Canon in D, it's only a sort of 6 or 7 minute piece, but it's complete repetition all of the time. And it appears that when you use this particular chord sequence as well in repetition, it fits so many things. Football chants, for instance. And the Village People Go West is a great way to check out if you're listening to something that's influenced by Pachelbel, because you can actually sing over it. It mightn't be exactly the same rhythm, but it's more the rhythm that is there. It might not be exactly the same melody, I meant to say. But if you sing sort of "Go West, life is peaceful there, da 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 da, 1-0 to the England." Not any offence meant to Scots or Welsh. I'm Welsh. But it's football chants. This piece of music just crops up in so many football chants, in so many chants. And apparently the whole thing about it is it's the repetition of the melodic phrase. And some people argue that this is a classic way to produce a successful pop record, because there's so much repetition that by the time you get to hearing it the first time, you're starting to get the gist of the last chorus. When you hear it the second time, you're already singing along. Now, if you're humming along with things, you're going to buy them, basically. And that's one of the arguments for cover versions as well, where people already know a song and like a song. And I did read, there's a fascinating article that a lot of this information comes from. And he points out that 8 of the 9 X Factor winners actually had their first debut singles as cover versions. Now, I'm not sure if it was an American or a British artist, but I don't know if the X Factor was on in America. But whichever one he's referring to, I'm sure it's correct. But it's fascinating that this combination of chords and in sort of descending sequence and the repetition, it just features in so many different records. And one of the things that was interesting is Ralph McTell 74 is a very early example of this in the sort of pop sense, as it were. But a lot of the songs come from the middle 90s: Aerosmith, Green Day, Oasis, Bell and Sebastian, Tupac, Coolio, Spiritualized. One of the reasons put forward was that in 1980, the movie Ordinary People, Robert Redford, a director, won 4 Oscars. He won Best Director, he won Best Film, Best Screenplay based on something else, and Best, can't remember the fourth one. But it meant that at the Oscars in on. You know, the music we play, because the actual original Pachelbel Canon in D is actually used as in the soundtrack for ordinary people. So it could well be that other writers have picked it up exactly as it were, and listened, and also just listening to other people's songs. You know, listening to, I quite like the way it goes. Street to London, I quite like the way that goes. So I think a lot of it's not plagiarism as such, but being subconsciously sometimes influenced by things. But apparently it's this descending chord sequence, and we've coupled with a repetition that makes it so popular, and so much for communal singing. Apparently, when Oasis did their last tour, the only song that they turned the mic to the audience for the audience to sing along with was "Don't Look Back in Anger," because this whole thing is just inherently designed for people to sing along to hum along to. You just in your head. I mean, it's one of those things you can't get out of your head. Go west. That kind of bouncing rhythm is what it's all about. And to find a piece of music that was written in 1694 having such an impact across the 20th century, I think it's fantastic. I think it's wonderful.
But like going back to the classical stuff, Something in the Air by Thunderclap Newman, right? And they've got the Marseillaise, haven't they?
Yeah.
In that particular song. Have you any idea how the Marseille isn't even mentioned in the song? Have you got any idea why?
I don't know. I think what happens is people often include, particularly when they're playing live, they'll often include melodies from other songs, other people, classical pieces. Sometimes as a tip of the cap.
Well, I'll tell you why. Marseille isn't mentioned in it, and this is the reason. During the Revolution, there was a gang of fellas, and they marched from Marseille right up to Paris. They walked from Marseille to Paris, and they were singing the national anthem, the Marseillaise, as we know it today. Dun, dun, dun. So that's why it was called the Marseillaise.
Brilliant.
Isn't that great? Isn't that? So there's dedication. There's everything for you, Derek. Go on there. Tell me.
You've hit on a point there with saying them, because we assume, or widely we assume, that most pop guys of modern age develop these catchy hooks for songs so that people, the audience, can sing along with them. But our classical guys of the time, Mozart, Beethoven, and they were thinking in the same way. There's only a limited number of notes on the scale.
Absolutely.
I play new music. I never studied the theory of music. It bored me, to be honest, but it's fascinating to watch over years how, say for instance, so many notes, how different people make those notes work for them. Classically, it's a bigger field, and we've grown up and we're respectful of what they've produced, and we think that's the ultimate in music. But of course, they, in their way, were being pop stars of the day. A lot of them live like pop stars.
Absolutely.
I think it was Mozart who never made a penny. Well, all the money that came in, he spent it. There was wild parties. There was all sorts of stuff going on. So he never actually. So you can kind of tie him to someone like Elton John or Mick Jagger, and then when you start to think like that, there's so many of them, and because of their differences, and some of them were rebels. I'm fascinated with a guy. Forgive the pronunciation might not be right, but I think it's Nikolai Paganini, the violinist,
Paganini, brilliant.
Italian,
Yeah,
absolute genius
Paganini.
to a player, and he had not quite a disability, but he had the ability to kind of conform. His fingers would bend, and the whole kind of momentum. So we could play notes and hit notes that no one else in his sphere could hit. So immediately it became he'd sold his soul to the devil to be that good. And I obviously my thing is Robert Johnson. Then the same story comes to him. And then in modern times we have fantastic musicians who are labeled the same way. And it's just, I think it's a mindset of a vision that someone wants to do something that's not quite been done before, or
No.
do it in a way that has not been done before. And I think that's what takes us with them, because we become fascinated with what they produce, which ultimately all music is based on the same scales.
It's amazing, isn't it? You know what's come out tonight in the first hour of everything. And
Oh,
it's been brilliant, absolutely been brilliant.
I
And
love I loved when you and Derek originally talked about this concept of merging the two. I thought fantastic. And I play classical music while I'm working because I find modern music gets in the way and you don't want to hear that song. Classical music you can work through. Um, but what you did is start me on a ball rolling to find out why these songs have an impact on us.
well, as you know, I go on, different. I go for the alternative news, you see.
Yeah,
And there's people who comment. And there was one, I don't know whether it was male or female, but the pseudonym was, her name, or his name was Violin. Now, we're talking about like a war, if you know what I mean. People are commenting about war and everything else. And
yeah,
when I seen violin, and it just says hello everybody. Now the point is, violin to me is the most romantic musical instrument ever. And
yeah.
all as I just got was Vivaldi and the Four Seasons.
Oh, beautiful.
And Paganini, by the way. And Paganini, he comes into the equation. Well, he came into the equation. So you have this just by a name, just by a name, and the beauty of music. And yet, you
Yeah,
have, during the First World War, you had the three, what, I forget what they called it, but it was the three things: God, King, country, and music.
yeah,
The Holy Trinity, the Holy Trinity,
yeah, yeah.
and music was one of them.
Was it Shakespeare?
Interesting.
The old the old saying that music soothes the savage beast.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The idea of
Music be the food of love.
yeah.
Oh yeah. If music be the food of love, play it.
Oh, I love that. I love that line.
And I think it's great that the king of rock and roll decided in the 70s to make his entrance on stage to Also Sprach Zarathustra,
Yeah.
Richard Strauss, also well known as the 2001 theme. I mean, the fact that Elvis, the king of rock and roll, actually decided that was the most impactful way to enter a stage, I think is fabulous.
Yeah,
Yeah, of course, anything like that. It's just, it's like, as I said before, if I get a bit depressed and the 1812 goes on because the crescendo is
Oh, brilliant.
absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And it just brings you out of depression. Listen, I've got to stop because Jason's, he's waiting to put this clip on. And after the clip, I'm going to talk about the English Civil War. And I wonder if there was any music there to be had.
Always music, yeah. I think there would have been, if anything else, there'd be march songs, and certainly in modern times, there's music written about,
All right then. Well, I'll see you after the break, boys.